It sounds crazy at first, almost insulting to everything you were taught about being a good man. But the longer you stare at it, the harder it becomes to ignore. The men who treat women exactly the way women say they want to be treated are often the same men who slowly become invisible to them. Not because they are cruel, not because they are indifferent, but because without realizing it, they dismantle their own presence while believing they are building connection. And the betrayal doesn't happen in the words, it happens in the body. In the voice that tightens when he tries to impress, in the shoulders that sink when he searches for approval instead of choosing direction, in the breathing that accelerates when he senses he's about to lose something. The man believes he is being attentive, his body is confessing insecurity, and the woman, even if she could never explain it like this, feels it before she understands it. There is an invisible mechanism operating here, a silent law that governs respect, desire, and emotional investment. And almost no one talks about it. So let me ask you something, slowly, honestly, without defending yourself. When was the moment in your life where the harder you tried to please a woman, the further you felt from the desire you wanted to awaken in her? I'm not asking if it happened. I'm asking when. That moment exists. And if you have the courage to recognize it, you are already closer to the truth most men spend their lives running from, because the pattern almost always begins the same way. A man enters an interaction with a quiet fantasy that if he is good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, different enough from the others, something inside her will awaken by gratitude, by logic, by appreciation. He listens carefully, he adapts, he softens his own desires to avoid creating friction. He aligns his rhythm with hers, his mood with hers, his availability with hers. Without noticing, his life begins to orbit reactions that never fully arrive. And what feels like love from the inside often looks like dependence from the outside. The body is always ahead of intention. While he believes he is creating safety, his biology is telling a different story. His shoulders no longer occupy space. His gaze no longer holds weight. His silences no longer carry tension. Everything inside him begins to ask for something without speaking it directly. And in the psychology of attraction, asking without words is louder than begging with them. The woman does not analyze this. She does not debate it internally. She simply feels it. Something loosens, something cools, something stops pulling the same way. This is where the first internal fracture appears. The man does not understand what changed. After all, he is now more attentive, more considerate, more present, more available. He doesn't see that his presence is no longer presence, it is waiting, that his attention is no longer choice, it is anxiety disguised as devotion, that his availability is no longer generosity, it is fear of loss wearing a noble mask. And when fear becomes the silent center of a man's behavior, everything in the dynamic distorts, even if no one names it. At some precise and almost imperceptible point, respect doesn't break. It evaporates. There is no dramatic fight, no clear betrayal, no obvious line crossed. There is only a sequence of micro-abandonments of the self. Once he swallows something he wanted to say. Then he accepts something that made him uncomfortable. Then he laughs at something that quietly wounded him. Then he waits for a reply longer than he would ever admit matters to him. And when he finally notices what's happening, he is no longer acting from his center. He is rotating around someone else's mood. The man still believes he is treating her well, but without realizing it, he has stopped treating himself with dignity. At this stage, almost everyone asks the wrong question. What am I doing wrong? And that question makes him even more reactive, more analytical, more dependent on validation that never stabilizes. Because the problem is not a technique, it is not a phrase, it is not a clever behavioral trick. The problem is structural. It is about axis, about internal weight, about emotional direction, about who is carrying the gravity in the interaction. When a man loses his axis, he loses something that cannot be recovered by effort alone. He loses the feeling that his life moves from internal impulse. He loses the emotional gravity that makes a woman not only listen to him, but feel him. He can remain polite, he can remain kind, he can even remain attractive in moments, but he is no longer central, and what is not central eventually becomes replaceable. This is where many men misinterpret the lesson. They assume the problem was being too nice, so they harden their faces, they simulate coldness, they rehearse indifference, they try to wear a mask that is not rooted in anything real. But this only creates another form of disconnection. Because the real shift never happens at the surface of behavior. It happens in the invisible center from which that behavior is born. There are men who do not speak loudly, do not dominate rooms, do not posture aggressively. And yet, when they enter a space, something reorganizes. The rhythm slows. The atmosphere densifies. Attention gathers without effort. No one can clearly explain why, but everyone feels it. That is not learned charisma. That is internal coherence. That is a man whose life is not asking permission to exist. A man who is not offering himself as a secondary option to his own identity. And here comes the first uncomfortable revelation. Many women do not want to be the center of your world. They want to be invited into a world that already has a center. They are not drawn to the pedestal. They are drawn to the structure beneath it. And when you turn a woman into your emotional priority before she has shown respect, reciprocity, and coherence, you do not elevate her. You disorganize yourself. The man who lives in reaction creates a cruel paradox. The more he tries to secure the connection, the more he exposes internal fragility. The more he explains, the more he reveals self-justification. The more he seeks agreement, the more he advertises the loss of direction. And in that emotional terrain, desire does not explode. It erodes, quietly, invisibly, in a way neither side can fully explain. There is a specific moment, almost ritual in nature, when a man changes position in the mind of a woman. It does not happen when he raises his voice. It does not happen when he imposes himself. It happens when he stops chasing and starts holding. When his silence carries more authority than his arguments. When his pause speaks louder than his urgency. When his unspoken boundaries weigh more than 1,000 explanations. In that moment, something inside her reorganizes, not because he controls her, but because he controls himself. The most common mistake is believing that attraction is built by accumulation of gestures, more favors, more availability, more proof. But attraction is not built by accumulation. It is built by density, not by how much you do, but by the quality of the energy behind it, not by speaking more, but by needing to speak less. And although it may disturb what you prefer to believe, psychology quietly confirms what your lived experience has already hinted at. The nervous system does not respond with deeper desire to endless accessibility. It responds to coherence, stability, and internal direction. Emotional safety is not created by someone who does everything for you. It is created by someone who governs himself. That is why when a man negotiates every boundary internally, when he hesitates before every limit, when he seeks permission to maintain what he wants, his body slips into a low-gravity emotional state, and the woman, without understanding why, begins to sense misalignment. She may still appreciate him, still talk to him, still receive things from him. But the invisible thread of desire tightens less and less. What no one tells you is that attraction is not maintained by accumulated affection. It is maintained by sustained tension. And tension is not conflict. Tension is living presence. It is contrast. It is rhythm. It is the delicate balance between closeness and distance, between warmth and containment, between saying yes and knowing how to say no without resentment. The man who has lost his internal axis cannot create tension. He can only seek approval or withdraw awkwardly. He oscillates between emotional overflow and emotional absence. And that oscillation exhausts the dynamic. It confuses it. It dulls it. The centered man, on the other hand, does not accelerate when anxiety arises. He does not drop his gaze when he senses evaluation. He does not justify himself when he establishes a boundary. He does not panic in the presence of silence. He does not use silence as punishment. He uses it as space. And within that space, a woman stops feeling pressured and begins to feel held. This is not manipulation. This is not a psychological trick. This is something far more demanding. The acceptance that the way you treat yourself leaks into every gesture, every pause, every tone. The way you walk through your life projects directly into how a woman perceives you. You do not teach her how to treat you with speeches. You teach her with your posture toward existence itself. The man who lives asking for signs broadcasts lack. The man who moves from his center broadcasts direction. And direction, in the oldest language of attraction, has always been a silent form of protection. Not protection from external danger, protection from internal chaos. That is why, counterintuitively, many women feel emotionally safer beside a man who does not negotiate his core than beside a man who tries to emotionally adapt to everything. Not because the first is colder, but because the first is more stable. And stability, when it is authentic, is profoundly magnetic. At this point, an internal conflict becomes unavoidable. Because to sustain a presence like this, a man must renounce something deeply comforting. The fantasy that if he tries hard enough, he will be chosen without having to choose himself first. He must abandon the belief that explaining his value is safer than embodying it. He must release the compulsion to be liked in order to finally begin to be. And this hurts, because it forces him to accept that many times he did not lose a woman because he did not do enough. He lost her because he did too much from the wrong internal position. The internal axis is not rebuilt with clever lines. It is not restored through memorized behavioral tactics. It returns when a man places weight back onto his own direction, when he stops using another person as his emotional compass, when his life recovers a rhythm that does not depend on a message, a reply, or a signal of acceptance. And when that happens, something strange begins to unfold. What once felt like effort becomes natural. Saying no loses guilt. Waiting loses desperation. Attention becomes selective. Warmth return, but now with edges. And those edges, instead of repelling, begin to organize desire. We have not yet reached the secret. We are only clearing the ground where that secret can exist without being distorted, because applying what you do not yet understand internally would only turn you into a rigid version of yourself, not a centered one. What comes next is not a list of behaviors. It is a shift of internal position, and when that position changes, you no longer need to perform. Your very way of being begins to speak for you.